The
What
boy's
is
voice
this,
echoed in
buddy?
the glass-walled office,
It's my
soft
report
yet
card.
fearless.
I got it.
"I just came to check my account," he said, holding a wrinkled slip of paper in both hands. Everyone in the room chuckled, even the billionaire behind the desk, amused by what he thought was a joke. But when the numbers flashed on the screen, the laughter froze. Something far greater than money had just been revealed. "Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me, from which country and at what time are you watching this story?" Everyone in the marble hall turned when the boy's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. He looked too small to belong there, and yet, somehow, he didn't flinch. The white pillars of the Palmetto Trust Building stretched up toward a dome of glass that caught the last amber light of a Georgia evening. Savannah outside was humming with people buying pumpkin pies and pecan tarts for Thanksgiving. But inside, the air smelled of citrus polish and money. Eli Porter stood just beyond the golden rope dividing guests from clients, a brown envelope clutched to his chest. His hoodie was too thin for the chill, his jeans worn at the knees, but his back was straight. When the receptionist asked if he was lost, he shook his head. "No, ma'am. I'm here to check my balance." A few suited men chuckled, one whispering something about kids and smartphones. At the counter, Thomas Whitaker, the VIP manager, leaned forward with the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided who you are. "This isn't a playground, son. What balance could you possibly have here?" Eli didn't move. "My grandfather told me to come today. Mr. Benjamin Porter." The name slid into the air like a key fitting an old lock. Thomas's smile faltered. The Porters had built half this city, but the boy didn't look like the family portraits that hung in the upstairs conference hall. Eli pulled a worn leather ID folder from his pocket and placed it on the counter. The embossed initials BP still caught the light. He said to bring this. Thomas hesitated, then waved the folder toward the computer terminal. The machine beeped twice, the screen blinking red. "Account restricted executive authorization required." Conversation around them thinned to whispers. One woman lifted her champagne glass and froze mid-gesture. Eli's reflection shimmered in the polished counter, a child standing among titans. "Please, sir," he said softly, "I just need to know." Thomas typed again, slower this time. Lines of data scrolled, then froze. The monitor dimmed to black. "That's strange." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Porter, could you wait a moment?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir." From his pocket, he drew a small notebook with a frayed red ribbon. Inside, written in his grandfather's hand, were 3 sentences he had read so many times they lived inside him now. "Keep your promise. Tell the truth. Don't be afraid of light." He touched the page with his thumb, as if it were a pulse. People nearby began pretending not to stare. Someone murmured, "Is that Benjamin Porter's kin?" Another voice, quieter, "He passed last week, didn't he?" The marble floor reflected the golden light fading through the glass ceiling, and for a heartbeat, the whole hall seemed to hold its breath. Thomas returned with 2 security officers in dark suits. Their expressions were polite, professional. "We're moving upstairs," he said. "Mr. Harold Benson would like a word." Eli followed them toward the elevator. The ride was silent, except for the faint hum of jazz coming from a speaker overhead, soft, nostalgic, the kind of tune his grandfather used to whistle while fixing the porch radio. Through the glass doors, he saw the city beyond the river turning the color of burnt copper. When the elevator doors opened, the upper floor looked more like a museum than a bank oil portraits. Carved chairs, a smell of lemon wood and paper. Mr. Benson, an older man with silver hair and gentle eyes, gestured toward a seat. "You're Benjamin Porter's grandson?" "Yes, sir. You know why he sent you here?" Eli hesitated. "He said it would matter someday. I think today's the day." Benson exchanged a glance with Thomas, who still hovered by the doorway. Then he nodded. "All right, son. Let's see what your grandfather left behind." Outside, the church bells struck 5, their sound drifting through the glass like ripples across the river. The boy closed his eyes for just a second, whispering, "Please, Grandpa, let them see the truth." Mr. Benson motioned toward the computer, its blue glow painting lines of light across his spectacles. "Thomas," he said quietly, "enter the account code from the document." Thomas hesitated, the tip of his finger hovering over the keyboard as if the numbers might burn. A faint click, then a second. The room filled with a low whirring hum. Eli sat on the edge of the chair, his sneakers barely touching the carpet. He could feel the weight of the envelope in his lap, the one his mother had refused to look at. "Don't chase ghosts, Eli," she'd said that morning. "Banks aren't made for promises." But Grandpa had never lied to him. Not once in 10 years. The screen flashed once, twice, and then rows of data appeared, letters, codes, numbers, larger than anything a child could imagine. Thomas leaned closer, color draining from his face. "Sir," he whispered. Benson's brows drew together. "That can't be right." He turned the monitor toward the boy. "Eli, do you know what this is?" The boy shook his head. "It's his savings, isn't it?" Benson exhaled slowly. "Your grandfather wasn't just a client here. He owned most of this building." The air thickened. Thomas took a step back, suddenly remembering every word he'd spoken downstairs. Eli blinked, unsure how to hold such information. The marble wall seemed to tilt around him. "He told me to come here when he was gone," he said. "Said you'd help me understand." The men exchanged looks the kind adults share when the world has just changed, but they don't know how to tell the child in front of them. Benson cleared his throat. "He left a note for you, Eli." "It's in the vault, marked with your initials. We'll need a moment to retrieve it." As they left, the office grew quiet. Through the tall window, the evening light spread over the river like melted copper. Eli pressed his forehead to the glass, watching the slow current. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice. "Keep your promise, son, even when they laugh." Minutes passed. Then the door opened again, no guards this time. Just Benson holding a small wooden box sealed with wax. He set it gently on the desk. "Your grandfather said this should be opened the day you first checked your balance." Eli ran his finger along the seal. It felt warm, as if it remembered who had touched it last. Inside was a single brass key tied to a note in careful handwriting. "Eli, if you're reading this, you've done what few grown men dare. You faced them. You stood for truth. The key is yours now. Follow it where your heart leads, not where others push you. Grandpa." The boy read it twice before speaking. He said the key opened something important. "Do you know what?" Benson smiled faintly, his eyes glimmering. Knowing Benjamin Porter, it could open half the world or just one good heart. Either way, I think he meant for you to decide which one matters more. Eli looked down at the key resting in his palm. For the first time that day, he smiled, a quiet, trembling thing, but it reached his eyes. The fear that had followed him from the bus stop seemed to fade into the gold light pouring through the glass. Downstairs, the security guard leaned on the railing, whispering to a colleague. "That kid, he's the old man's grandson, right? Never thought the Porters had any family left. Guess the world keeps a few surprises," the other replied. As Eli stepped back into the elevator, the brass key clinked softly against the edge of the envelope. He stared at the numbers above the door, counting down. 12, 9, 6. The hum of the cables sounded like the low breath of the city itself. When the doors opened to the lobby, everyone turned again. The same marble floor, the same golden light, but this time, no one laughed. The boy walked past them slowly, each step leaving a faint squeak on the polished tile. Outside, the air smelled of rain and roasted pecans from a vendor cart. Eli lifted his face to the dusky sky. Somewhere behind the clouds, his grandfather's voice still lingered steady, proud, patient. He took the key from his pocket, held it up to the fading light and whispered, "I came, Grandpa, just like I promised." The river wind caught his words and carried them down Bay Street, over the rooftops and oaks of Savannah, until they disappeared into the sound of church bells calling the city home. The morning after the visit to Palmetto Trust dawned gray and slow, the kind of Savannah morning that carried the smell of salt and pine. Eli sat at the kitchen table of their small apartment above River Street, his breakfast untouched. The brass key lay beside his cereal bowl, glinting faintly each time the cloud shifted. His mother, Mara, moved quietly around the kitchen, trying not to let him see her red eyes. "Eli, honey," she said finally, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "Whatever that man told you at the bank, just remember your grandpa loved stories more than money." Eli looked up. "He left something for me, Mom. A key. Mr. Benson said it was important." Mara pressed her lips together, a habit she had whenever she wanted to keep words from breaking. "Your grandfather was a dreamer, sweetheart. He built half this city, but he never built a home that felt safe. Eli turned the key over in his palm. Maybe this one will. A soft knock came from the hallway. When Mara opened the door, a woman in a gray coat stood there, holding a black briefcase and a paper envelope sealed in red wax. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Porter? My name's Evelyn Graves. I was your father-in-law's attorney." Mara's shoulders stiffened. "Attorney? There must be a mistake." "There isn't," Evelyn said gently. "Mr. Benjamin Porter left specific instructions that this letter be delivered only after his grandson visited the bank." She handed the envelope to Eli. The wax seal bore the same initials as the old leather ID, BP. Eli stared at it, afraid the moment he broke the seal, something sacred might vanish. Mara whispered, "You don't have to read it now." "I want to," he said quietly. "He asked me to." Evelyn nodded, taking a seat across from him. "Then I'll stay, if that's all right." The sound of the wax cracking filled the tiny kitchen like thunder. Inside was a folded letter written in his grandfather's slanted script. Eli unfolded it carefully. "My beloved grandson, if you are reading this, it means you've kept your word. You walked into the world on your own feet, just as I hoped you would. What lies ahead will ask more of you than you think you have, but you do not face it alone." Eli's voice trembled as he read. Mara reached across the table and took his hand. Evelyn leaned forward, eyes soft behind her glasses. "In the years before you were born, your father and I made enemies powerful ones. We tried to protect what was right, but in doing so, we lost almost everything. He disappeared, so you could live without fear. The world may have forgotten him, but he never forgot you." Mara gasped. "Benjamin, why would you—" She stopped, tears blurring her vision. Eli's throat tightened. "He says Dad didn't leave us. He was protecting us." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Your grandfather mentioned danger. He said the truth was buried under paper and greed. But there's more, isn't there?" Eli unfolded the final page. "You will soon face a choice, Eli. 3 paths, each heavy in its own way. The first, to claim what is yours and bear the weight that comes with it. The second, to wait until you've grown wise enough to see beyond greed. The third, to walk away entirely and find peace in an ordinary life. Whatever you choose will define not your wealth, but your heart." When Eli finished, the room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. The light from the window fell across the letter, soft as morning prayer. Evelyn spoke first. "He wasn't just leaving you money. He was leaving you a test." Mara pushed back her chair. "A test for a child?" He was out of his mind. But Eli didn't hear her. His gaze was fixed on the brass key beside the letter. He whispered, "He said I wouldn't face it alone." Evelyn frowned. "Maybe he meant me, or someone else still watching over you." Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river, long and low. Mara stood and began pacing, her hands trembling. "Whatever this is, we should destroy it. Forget it ever existed." Eli shook his head. "I can't. Grandpa trusted me." Evelyn's eyes met Mara's. "He was always 10 steps ahead of everyone. If he gave Eli a key, there's a door waiting to be opened. Whether you like it or not, Mrs. Porter, your father-in-law left your son a legacy and perhaps a truth you both deserve." Mara's voice broke. "And if that truth costs us more than it's worth?" Evelyn's answer was barely a whisper. "Then it was never meant to stay hidden." The rain began to fall, tapping against the window panes. Eli folded the letter, tracing the wax seal one last time before slipping it back into its envelope. "I'm not afraid," he said softly. Evelyn gave him a faint, proud smile. "You sound just like him, Em." By late afternoon, the rain had slowed to a quiet mist. Savannah shimmered in shades of silver, the street lamps flickering on one by one. Evelyn closed her briefcase and set her cup of coffee aside. "There's one more thing," she said. "Your grandfather asked me to take you somewhere once this letter was opened." Mara stepped forward, protective instinct sharp in her voice. "Absolutely not! He's a child, not a pawn in another one of Benjamin's schemes." Evelyn didn't argue. She simply reached into her coat and placed a small metal card on the table, engraved with an address. "The old Porter warehouse on Riverfront Lane. He told me that when the time came, the lock would recognize the key." Eli glanced at the brass key. "That's where he used to take me on weekends," he whispered. "Said it was full of memories." Mara hesitated, looking at the rain-soaked window. "Eli, It's late. That place hasn't been open in years. But Grandpa wanted me to go, he said softly. You always told me to keep my promises. Something in those words made her stop. The way he said them calm, certain, reminded her of Benjamin himself. After a long breath, she nodded. Fine, but I'm coming with you. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's what he hoped you'd say. The streets were slick when they left the apartment, the air cool and damp with the smell of the river. Cars hissed past as they walked beneath the canopy of oaks draped with Spanish moss. The old warehouse stood at the edge of the wharf, half hidden behind a row of rusted shipping containers. Eli lifted the key to the heavy iron lock. It slid in perfectly, turning with a sound that echoed like a sigh from another time. The door creaked open, releasing a breath of cedar and dust. Inside, the air felt alive with memory. Wooden crates stacked to the rafters, shelves of ledgers, photographs framed in tarnished brass. A single desk lamp still burned dimly in the corner. Evelyn crossed the room and opened a drawer. Inside was a second envelope, thinner than the first. On the front, in Benjamin Porter's handwriting, for when the key finds its door. Mara's fingers trembled as Eli handed it to her. You should read it, he said. She opened the letter carefully. Her father-in-law's words were short, but heavy. Mara, if you're reading this, then the time has come to stop running. The world is cruel to those who stand for what's right, but cruelty ends the moment we stop feeding it with fear. You and Caleb did what you had to do. Protect our boy. Now, let him protect what's left of us. Her eyes filled. He knew, she whispered. He always knew. Evelyn nodded. He kept your husband's secret so long he feared he'd die with it. Eli's voice was barely a breath. My dad. He's still alive, isn't he? Silence. The kind that felt like the whole city holding its breath. Evelyn looked at Mara, and Mara looked away. Finally, she said, there were men, dangerous men. Your father stood against them. One night he didn't come home. Benjamin said it was safer for us to believe he was gone. Eli stared at the floorboards, tracing the grain with his shoe. But he's not gone. Evelyn stepped closer. Your grandfather believed Caleb was still out there, waiting for the world to forget his name. That's why he left the key. It opens more than doors, Eli. It opens truth. Ugh. Lightning flickered outside, followed by the slow rumble of thunder. The three of them stood among the crates, surrounded by ghosts of the past. Eli lifted the brass key and held it tight. Then I'm going to find him. Mara touched his shoulder gently. We'll find him together. Evelyn closed the desk drawer, her expression solemn. Then we begin tomorrow. But for tonight, promise me you'll rest. Your grandfather wouldn't want you facing the storm on an empty heart. They locked the warehouse and stepped back into the rain. The sky above the river glowed faintly, the last light of day bending through clouds like the memory of something sacred. As they walked home, Eli slipped his hand into his mother's. Mom? Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Dad knows about me? Mara's eyes softened. He's known every day. They reached the corner where the streetlights hummed against the drizzle. Behind them, the river whispered secrets no one could quite make out. Evelyn looked back once at the warehouse door. When truth sleeps too long, she murmured, it dreams of being found. Eli turned the key one last time in his palm, feeling its weight, its promise. The night smelled of wet stone and redemption waiting to begin. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving Savannah washed clean. The sunlight on the cobblestones shimmered like small mirrors, and the air smelled of salt and jasmine. Mara stood by the window, folding a dish towel that didn't need folding. Her eyes followed her son as he sat cross-legged on the floor, studying the brass key like it might speak if he listened hard enough. Evelyn arrived, precisely, at 9, a calm figure in her charcoal gray coat. She placed a folder on the table. I made a few calls, she said. Your grandfather's offshore accounts were dormant, but someone tried to access them 2 nights before he died. Mara looked up sharply. Someone? Who? Evelyn shook her head. The trail stops at a private network, likely tied to the same people your husband once crossed. If he's alive, they might be watching again. Eli raised his eyes. Then we should find him first. Mara knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Eli, this isn't a game. Your father loved you, but the world he ran from is still out there, Evelyn finished quietly. and it may know that the account is active again. A knock came at the door. Sharp. Urgent. The three of them froze. Mara exchanged a glance with Evelyn, who nodded slightly. "Stay behind me," she whispered to Eli. The second knock was louder. Mara opened the door just enough to see a man standing in the hallway, soaked from the drizzle, his face half hidden beneath a hood. His voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. "Please don't be afraid. I'm looking for my son." For a heartbeat, the world tilted. Mara gripped the doorframe, her voice breaking. "Caleb?" He pulled back the hood. His hair was streaked with gray now, his beard uneven. But his eyes, those same earnest, impossible eyes, met hers. "I had to come," he said. "They know the account's been opened." Evelyn stepped forward, her tone professional but shaking at the edges. "Mr. Porter, your father's estate is protected. How did you even know?" Caleb's gaze flicked to the table where the envelope and key lay in plain sight. "Because Benjamin planned it that way. He told me this day would come." Eli emerged from behind his mother, his small hand clutching the edge of her sweater. His voice was soft, trembling. "You're my dad?" Caleb dropped to one knee. He didn't dare touch him, not yet. "Yes, son. I never stopped thinking about you." Mara pressed a hand to her mouth, the tears she'd fought for years spilling freely now. "Why didn't you come back? Why let us think?" "Because if I did," he said, "they would have killed you both." The room fell into silence, heavy enough to feel. Outside, a ship horn groaned from the river, low and distant. Evelyn steadied herself. "Who are they?" "Caleb. Investors," he said bitterly. "Men who thought Benjamin owed them power. When your grandfather refused to launder their money, they buried him in lawsuits and threats. I had evidence. I thought I could stop them. I was wrong." Mara sank into a chair, staring at her hands. "So, you ran." "I ran to keep you safe." His voice cracked. "I didn't think he'd drag our boy into it." "He didn't drag me," Eli said quietly. "He trusted me." For the first time, Caleb looked at him fully. The boy's face was thin, pale from nights of worry, but his eyes, those were Benjamin's eyes, steady, brave. "You look just like him," Caleb whispered. Eli took a step closer. "Then help me finish what he started." Thunder rolled again outside, faint but near. Evelyn's phone buzzed on the table, flashing an alert. She frowned. "Someone's trying to access the trust records remotely. We need to move now." Mara stood, panic sharpening her voice. "Move where? We can't just run again." "We won't," Caleb said, reaching for the key. "We'll face them this time." Evelyn hesitated, studying his trembling hands. "You've been hiding for 10 years, Caleb. Facing them isn't something you just walk into." He met her gaze. "It is when they're already coming." A car engine roared outside. Too close, too sudden. Tires splashed through puddles. Eli turned toward the window just in time to see a black sedan slow by the curb, the tinted glass reflecting the river light. Caleb grabbed the boy's shoulder. "Don't look, but don't." His tone was sharp, almost frightened. "They can see us." Evelyn locked the door. "We need to leave. Now." Mara's voice trembled. "Where?" Caleb's answer came without hesitation. "The vault. It's the only place they can't reach." Eli clutched the key to his chest as his father pulled on his coat. He didn't understand everything, the danger, the secrets, but he understood one thing completely. The man who had vanished into stories was real, and he was afraid. They slipped out through the back stairwell, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the sound of rain starting again. Somewhere behind them, a phone began to ring inside the empty apartment, its sound growing louder and louder until it was all that remained. The vault lay deep beneath the Palmetto Trust building, its hallway lined with steel and silence. The air was colder there, the kind of chill that carried both memory and warning. Caleb moved ahead, guiding them with the familiarity of someone who had once built part of this place. Evelyn kept close behind, typing a code into her phone to disable the cameras Benjamin himself had installed decades earlier. When they reached the final door, Caleb placed his palm on the scanner. A soft click echoed through the corridor. "He never removed my clearance," he whispered. "He always believed I'd come back." Inside, the room was vast and dimly lit. Filing cabinets stretched along the walls like quiet sentinels. In the center stood a single desk, with an old computer terminal and a safe built directly into the concrete floor. Dust motes drifted through the beam of the single overhead lamp. Eli stepped forward, eyes wide. "Is this where Grandpa worked?" Caleb nodded. "This is where he kept everything, the records, the names, the proof." Evelyn set her briefcase on the desk, unlocking it with practiced precision. "I can access the backup drive," she said. "But once we power this up, they'll know exactly where we are." "Then we don't have much time," Caleb replied. He turned to Eli. "Son, the key." Eli handed it to him. Caleb knelt by the safe and slid the brass key into a hidden slot beneath the dial. A faint green light blinked once, then twice, before the lid released with a hiss. Inside were folders bound with ribbon, a flash drive, and a photograph of a young Caleb and Benjamin standing outside the same bank 30 years earlier. Caleb's hand shook as he picked up the photo. "He told me once that justice doesn't sleep, it just waits for someone brave enough to wake it." He looked up at Eli. "Maybe that's you." Evelyn loaded the flash drive into the terminal. Lines of data filled the screen: transactions, offshore transfers, ledgers connecting names that no one dared to speak aloud. "Good Lord," she murmured. "This isn't just evidence of fraud. It's a map of corruption across half the state." Mara leaned against the wall, her voice barely steady. "Then we give it to the police." Caleb shook his head. "You think they aren't part of it? Benjamin tried that. They buried him under paperwork and fear. The only reason we're still breathing is because he hid this from them." Eli stepped closer to the desk, reading the glowing text lines. His small voice broke the silence. "So Grandpa wasn't rich because he stole. He was rich because he didn't." Evelyn turned to him slowly, moved by the purity of that truth. "Exactly." Outside, thunder cracked again, though the storm had passed hours ago. The lights flickered. Caleb straightened. "They've found us." The elevator alarm began to beep somewhere down the hall, low but growing. Evelyn pulled the flash drive from the terminal and tucked it into her coat pocket. "We can't go back the same way." Caleb crossed to the far wall and pressed a hidden panel. A narrow maintenance door slid open, revealing a stairway lit by emergency bulbs. Benjamin designed 2 exits for emergencies. He never trusted single paths. They hurried up the steps, the metallic clatter of their shoes echoing in rhythm with their racing hearts. Eli clutched his mother's hand. "Dad," he whispered, "if Grandpa planned all this, does that mean he knew you'd come back?" Caleb looked over his shoulder, eyes soft despite the fear. "He always did. He just didn't know when." They emerged into an alley behind the bank, the air thick with humidity and the scent of rain-soaked brick. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. Evelyn handed the flash drive to Caleb. "This is proof enough to destroy them," she said. "But it's also bait. If they know it exists, they'll keep coming." Caleb nodded. "Then we'll use it on our terms." He crouched beside Eli, his voice low but steady. "What happens next might get messy, but I need you to remember something. Money isn't what they fear losing. It's truth. And you, son, you carry that now." Eli nodded, eyes bright with a courage that didn't belong to his age. "Then we'll keep it safe." Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will." From the far end of the alley, headlights flashed briefly against the wet pavement before disappearing. Evelyn checked her watch. "They're circling the block. We need to move toward the river." Mara exhaled shakily. "And then what?" Caleb's voice was calm. "Then we disappear again, but this time, together." They began to walk, their shadows stretching long across the cobblestones. The city around them hummed like a giant heartbeat, alive with secrets. Behind them, inside the vault, the forgotten computer flickered once more, its screen still glowing with a single unfinished message from Benjamin Porter, dated years before his death. "If you're reading this, it means my family found the truth. Tell my grandson I'm proud." The monitor blinked twice, then went dark. They reached the riverfront just before dawn. Fog drifted off the savannah, wrapping the wharf in soft gray. Caleb guided them into an old boathouse Benjamin once used as a records depot. The wooden floor creaked, the air thick with salt and dust. Evelyn set the flash drive on the table and plugged it into her laptop. "This is everything your grandfather hid," she said. Lines of numbers rolled across the screen shell companies, secret transfers, names of men who built empires on lies. Mara looked pale. All this for money? Caleb shook his head. For control. They buried half the city's future under these numbers. Eli watched silently, his small hands folded over the brass key. Can we stop them? Evelyn glanced up. If the truth goes public, yes, but it'll also paint a target on your backs. Caleb hesitated, eyes tired. Then maybe it's time they know what Benjamin died protecting. Eli stepped forward, voice steady. Grandpa said light isn't the enemy of darkness, it's the cure. Caleb smiled faintly. He said that to me once, too. Outside, sirens echoed faintly from the city. Evelyn closed the laptop and slipped it into her bag. We'll need help to release this safely. There's one man Benjamin trusted Judge Harrison. We'll find him. Mara touched Caleb's arm. And if he's part of them, then we'll keep moving, Caleb said. He turned to his son. You ready, Eli? The boy nodded. I promised Grandpa I wouldn't be afraid. They stepped out into the mist, the first light of morning breaking over the river. Savannah stirred awake, unaware that somewhere beneath its polished skyline, a child carried the key to its truth. They found Judge Harrison at his modest office behind the old courthouse. He was gray-haired, calm, with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much. When Caleb handed him the flash drive, Harrison studied it for a long moment before speaking. Benjamin trusted me once, the judge said. If his grandson carries this key, then the time for silence is over. Evelyn opened the laptop and played the file's evidence of fraud, bribes, and missing funds that traced back to the same men who had hunted Caleb for a decade. The judge's face hardened. This could burn half the city, but it'll bring justice, too. Mara's voice shook. And what about our family? He looked at her kindly. Justice doesn't spare anyone, but it can set you free. Eli stepped forward. Grandpa said truth isn't supposed to be easy, just right. The judge smiled faintly. He taught you well. Outside, the evening light poured through the courthouse windows, warm and golden. Caleb exhaled, years of guilt finally lifting from his shoulders. He looked at his son. You did what I couldn't. You brought the truth home. Eli took his father's hand. We did it together. Somewhere down the street, the church bells rang 6 times, their sound mingling with the wind off the river. For the first time in years, Savannah felt quiet, like the city itself was breathing again. Thanksgiving morning arrived wrapped in a mist that rolled gently over the Savannah River. The porterhouse sat on the edge of the old district, half hidden by ancient oaks draped in silver moss. Mara Porter stood at the window, her reflection faint against the glass, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. The world outside was golden, but her heart carried the dull gray of years spent waiting. It had been 10 years since Caleb's disappearance, 10 years of letters that never came, of rumors that he died during a storm off the coast, of whispers that he'd run from shame. The last image she had of him was at Benjamin's office, his eyes full of fire and hurt. Before the door slammed and the world fractured, she turned when a sound broke the quiet, a car door closing outside. Her fingers went still. Through the fog, she saw a figure at the gate, tall, broad-shouldered, moving slowly as if the ground beneath his feet was unfamiliar. The mug slipped from her hand and shattered. When she opened the door, the man standing on the porch looked both familiar and foreign. His hair was touched with gray, his face marked by years that had hardened into silence. But his eyes, those same blue eyes she had once fallen in love with, were unmistakable. "Mara," he said softly, his voice barely holding. "I wasn't sure you'd even open the door." Her voice trembled. "After 10 years, I stopped locking it." He took off his hat, rain dripping from the brim. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to earn it." Before Mara could speak, a small voice from behind her said, "Mom, who's that?" Eli stood barefoot in the hallway, his Thanksgiving tie crooked, clutching a paper lantern shaped like a star. He was 10, the same number of years Caleb had been gone. Caleb's breath caught. "He's so grown." Mara stepped aside, her hand gently on Eli's shoulder. "This is your father, sweetheart." Eli blinked, studying the stranger's face. "Dad? From the pictures?" Caleb nodded slowly, kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "Yes, buddy. From the pictures, and from the stories your mom told you when you couldn't sleep." The boy tilted his head. "You were gone a long time." "I was," Caleb said, voice breaking. "And every day I wanted to come home. I just didn't know how." Eli hesitated, then held out his paper lantern. Mom says people who are really sorry help fix what's broken. Can you help fix us? The question landed like a prayer. Caleb took the lantern with shaking hands. I'll spend the rest of my life trying. For a long moment, the three of them stood under the doorway, the mist curling around them like forgiveness taking form. Somewhere far off, the church bells began to ring slow, solemn, and certain. Caleb looked toward the sound and whispered, I should have come home sooner, Dad. That evening, the Porter house carried a warmth it hadn't felt in years. The rain outside had softened to a mist, the kind that made the oak trees shimmer beneath the streetlights. Mara moved through the kitchen quietly, her apron dusted with flour and the faint scent of nutmeg following her like a memory. From the living room came the gentle sound of a record spinning one of Benjamin's old jazz albums that Caleb had found buried beneath boxes in the attic. Caleb sat at the table, staring at the seat across from him. Benjamin's chair, the one that had remained untouched for a decade. A folded newspaper rested beside it today's date, but it might as well have been a lifetime away from the last time they had all eaten together. He spoke softly, almost to himself. He'd hate this silence. Mara wiped her hands and joined him.
He'd also hate how much you both look alike now.
Caleb smiled faintly, a sad curve of the mouth. Guess time doesn't ask permission to turn us into our parents. They sat without speaking for a while, listening to the record's soft crackle. Then, Mara broke the silence. Where did you go, Caleb? All those years, I need to understand. He turned the pocket watch over in his hands, the one Benjamin had given him when he was 20. The engraved words, "Keep the light burning," gleamed faintly in the lamplight. I went everywhere and nowhere, he said quietly. After the investigation, after Dad's reputation was torn apart, I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you and Eli. I told myself I was shielding you from my mistakes, but really I was just hiding from them. Her voice trembled, softer than the rain. You left a child who asked about you every night. Caleb's eyes glistened. I know. And I'd give anything to rewrite that. Mara looked at him for a long time before saying, You can't rewrite the past, Caleb, but you can choose how the story ends. He nodded, taking her hand gently. Then let me start here. Outside, laughter rose from the porch. Eli was showing the neighborhood kids his paper lantern, the same one he'd given Caleb that morning. The light inside flickered gold against the night. Caleb stood by the window, watching. He's signaling, he murmured. Mara joined him, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. He's showing you the way home. Hours later, after the neighbors had gone and the house had grown quiet again, Caleb wandered the living room. His eyes caught something on the mantel, a small brass key, its surface dull but the engraving still sharp. B. P. He lifted it carefully, as if touching it might wake the ghosts of the past. Did you know this was here? He asked. Mara shook her head. It was in your father's coat pocket when they sent his things from the hospital. I never had the heart to look inside until today. The key was tied to a yellowed tag. The ink faded but legible. Carter Bank. Safe deposit, 24 amperes. Caleb stared at it, his pulse quickening. That's where Dad opened the youth fund years ago. The one he said would change everything. Mara folded her arms, her tone thoughtful. Maybe he left something for you to finish. He nodded slowly, the realization sinking in. Or something to remind me of why he started it. He set the key on the table and exhaled. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to that vault. Mara looked at him quietly, then said, Don't go alone this time, Caleb. He smiled, small, weary, but real. I won't. I promise. Before heading upstairs, he paused by the couch where Eli had fallen asleep. The boy's hand still held the string of his lantern, its soft glow flickering like a heartbeat. Caleb brushed a strand of hair from his son's forehead and whispered, I'll make it right, son. I swear. As he straightened, the house creaked gently, as if the walls themselves were breathing again after years of holding their breath. Outside, the Savannah River shimmered beneath the moonlight, steady and endless. Caleb slipped the key into his coat pocket, its weight strangely comforting. For the first time in a decade, the road ahead didn't feel like running, it felt like returning. And when the clock struck midnight, a single church bell rang in the distance, echoing through the quiet streets, like a promise carried home. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of Eli's room, catching the edges of a dozen paper airplanes that hung from the ceiling. Caleb stood quietly in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching his son sleep. 10 years, that's how long it had been since he'd last stood in a room like this. One filled with small, living reminders of a life that had continued without him. On the desk sat a baseball glove, a stack of comic books, and a photograph. Mara must have framed a picture of Benjamin holding a toddler, smiling proudly. Caleb wasn't in that photo. The emptiness of that fact pressed on his chest like a weight he'd been carrying since the day he left. He didn't notice Mara at first, standing behind him with a cup of coffee. "You look like a ghost in your own home," she said softly. Caleb exhaled. "That's exactly how it feels." Ugh. Downstairs, the scent of pancakes drifted up from the kitchen. Eli's footsteps followed, quick and uneven, his voice echoing through the hall. "Mom, the syrup's cold!" Caleb smiled faintly. "He sounds like me when I was his age." Mara nodded. "He's got your stubborn streak, and your heart." When Eli entered, his hair still messy from sleep, he froze for a second. The silence between father and son stretched thin, fragile but alive. Caleb knelt by the table. "Morning, champ." "Who?" Eli hesitated, then sat across from him, fork tapping the plate nervously. "Mom said you like pancakes. I made the second batch." Caleb's voice was steady, careful. "Then it's the best breakfast I've had in 10 years. The boy looked up, unsure if it was a joke, but when he saw his father's eyes gentle, sincere, he smiled. Just a little. As they ate, the conversation began in small, uncertain pieces. Caleb asked about school, favorite comics, baseball. Eli answered shyly at first, then more freely. "I'm the shortstop on my team. Grandpa used to come watch practice." Caleb's throat tightened. "He taught me how to throw a curveball." Eli brightened. "He told me that story. Said you broke a window once." They both laughed, and for the first time since Caleb's return, it didn't feel forced. Later, as Mara cleared the dishes, Caleb found a photo album on the counter. Inside were moments he'd missed Eli's first day of school. Christmas mornings, birthdays, without him. He turned each page slowly, the images cutting deeper than any wound. Eli leaned over his shoulder. "Mom says you were gone to fix something important." Caleb looked at him, eyes soft. "I thought I was fixing the world, but I should have been fixing this." He touched the photo of a small boy holding a baseball bat. The boy tilted his head. "You can still fix it, right?" Caleb smiled faintly. "If you'll let me try." Eli hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Maybe." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something fragile and real. Outside, the wind carried the smell of magnolia through the open window. Caleb glanced at the baseball glove on the shelf. "You up for a game after dinner?" Eli's eyes lit up. "You mean just us?" "Just us," Caleb said. "And no broken windows this time." The boy laughed. The kind of laugh that healed places words never could. As sunlight spilled across the room, Caleb realized that rebuilding trust wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, morning after morning, until love learned how to breathe again. The morning sun glimmered against the windows of Carter Bank, painting the lobby in soft gold. Caleb Porter hesitated at the revolving doors, his son beside him, holding a paper cup of cocoa, steam curling up like a small prayer. Savannah had woken slow that day, traffic humming, pigeons on the streetlights. But for Caleb, the world seemed to move only around the rhythm of his heartbeat. It had been 10 years since he'd last walked into a place like this, a room full of marble, whispers, and polished silence. But today wasn't about fear. It was about the promise of finally facing what he'd left behind. Eli tugged at his sleeve. "Are you scared, Dad?" Caleb smiled faintly. "A little. But sometimes, being scared just means you're finally doing the right thing." They followed the bank manager down a long hallway lined with glass partitions and quiet echoes. The man stopped at a metal door marked Private Vaults, turned a key, and motioned them in. The air was cold, clean, and smelled faintly of metal and cedar. Rows of safety deposit boxes gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "This way, Mr. Porter," the manager said. "Box 24A. It's been untouched since your father's passing." The brass key in Caleb's hand felt heavier now. He turned it slowly in the lock, the click echoing in his chest like the beat of a second heart. The drawer slid open with a quiet metallic sigh. Inside was a sealed envelope, a flash drive wrapped in an old handkerchief, and a black notebook bound with cracked leather. On the envelope, in Benjamin's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For my son, When he stops running from who he is, Caleb's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. Eli leaned in close, his breath held tight. My boy, if you are reading this, it means you found your way home. I never wanted my shadow to follow you. What I built was never about wealth. It was about giving what we never had, a light for others. The Porter Foundation still lives, but only if you choose to carry it. Remember this, light is not inherited. It's kindled over and over by love, courage, and forgiveness. Make peace with the man you were, and build something worthy of the boy who still believes in you. Caleb's vision blurred. He placed the letter gently into Eli's small hands. He wrote this for both of us, he whispered. Eli stared at the words, his voice soft. Grandpa wanted us to finish what he started. Caleb nodded. And maybe this time we'll do it together. He opened the black notebook next. It was filled with plans, sketches of a youth center by the river, notes on after-school programs, quotes scribbled in the margins. Every child deserves a door to light. And tucked between the pages, a photograph Benjamin standing beside a younger Caleb, both of them smiling, covered in sawdust from a half-built community hall. Caleb hadn't remembered that moment until now. Eli touched the picture. You look happy there. I was, Caleb said softly. He and I built that frame together, right before everything went wrong. Eli frowned. So, now we finish the rest? Caleb smiled through tears. That's exactly what we'll do. When they left the vault, the world outside felt different, brighter somehow, as if the air itself had lightened. They walked slowly through the park on Bay Street, the river glinting beside them. Seagulls wheeled overhead, and the bells from St. John's Cathedral rang across the morning. Eli skipped ahead, holding the letter high like a banner. Dad, do you think Grandpa can see us? Caleb looked up at the sunlight piercing through the clouds and nodded. If love leaves a mark, then yes. He's right here. They stopped at the bridge overlooking the river, the same one where Benjamin had once taken Caleb fishing as a boy. The water below sparkled and rolled, endless and calm. Caleb rested a hand on Eli's shoulder. When I left, I thought I was protecting you, but I was really just running from myself. This, he held up the key, glinting in the light. This isn't about money. It's a reminder that every generation gets a chance to do better. Eli's eyes shone. Then let's start today, Caleb smiled, his voice steady now. Today's good. They stood there for a long time, father and son, the brass key between them like a promise renewed. The city moved quietly around them, the sound of church bells, the scent of river salt, the murmur of a world still turning, and for the first time in 10 years, Caleb felt something that had eluded him since the day he left. Peace. When they turned toward home, the morning sun followed them, warm on their backs. The past no longer chased them, it simply walked beside them, transformed into light. Savannah woke that morning, dressed in gold and soft mist. The air smelled of roasted pecans and river salt, the kind of scent that carried memory. On the corner of Whitaker Street, the old youth center, the same one Benjamin Porter built decades ago, stood alive again. Fresh paint, banners fluttering, children running under the oaks. It had been closed for nearly 10 years, forgotten in legal tangles and silence. But today, it opened again as the Porter Youth Foundation, rebuilt from the ashes of secrecy and fear. And though the mayor's office sent a brief statement, the real celebration came from the people, the single mothers, the retired teachers, the children who had grown up hearing the name Porter whispered like a prayer. Caleb stood near the entrance, adjusting the collar of his jacket. He wasn't used to crowds or microphones, but this day wasn't about comfort. It was about finishing what his father started. Beside him, Mara held Eli's hand tightly, her eyes shining with pride and relief. Eli wore a simple blue sweater and a name tag that read volunteer. He looked up at his dad. Do you think Grandpa would have liked this? Caleb smiled. He's probably complaining we started late. Eli laughed, the sound pure and bright as the morning light. When the clock struck 10, the band began to play a small brass group from the local high school. Neighbors filled the courtyard, chatting, hugging, carrying foil trays of food. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't meant to be. It was real. Evelyn Graves approached, her gray coat blending with the fall air. You did it, Caleb. Your father would be proud. He looked around at the laughter, the decorations, the way the sunlight hit the new sign. No, he said. We did it. At the far end of the courtyard, An elderly man in a wheelchair waved to them. His hair was white as the clouds, his eyes kind. Caleb recognized him, Mr. Holloway, one of Benjamin's oldest friends from the construction days. "I thought you'd moved to Florida," Caleb said, greeting him warmly. "Moved back when I heard the Porters were stirring things up again," Holloway replied with a grin. "Couldn't miss it." Mara leaned down to hand him a cup of cider. "You were there when this place was built, weren't you?" "Sure was. Your father-in-law used to say a foundation's not made of concrete, it's made of people." Looks like he was right. Eli's eyes followed a group of kids setting up a table full of canned goods and toys. "Dad, can I help?" "Go," Caleb said. "That's what today's for." Eli ran off, joining the others. Watching him laugh, Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time in months, the weight of grief began to lift. The ribbon cutting was simple. Caleb spoke only a few words. "This building once stood for charity." Then it fell to silence. "Today, it stands again for light. My father believed in second chances for people, for families, for cities. So do I." The crowd applauded softly. A few hands raised in quiet gratitude. After the ceremony, Evelyn found him by the gate. "It feels like the end of something," she said. Caleb shook his head. "No, it feels like the start of something that should never have stopped." The afternoon melted into golden light. Children painted murals on the walls, one of them a bright sunrise with the words, "Keep the light burning." Caleb traced the phrase with his fingertip, whispering, "He'd love this." Behind him, Mara took a photo, her smile trembling. "You look just like him when you say that." As dusk approached, long tables were set under the oaks, covered with food brought by neighbors. The first Thanksgiving in years where no one sat alone. Caleb helped serve meals while Eli ran between tables handing out pumpkin pie slices. Laughter filled the park, the kind that carried across the river like a hymn. And yet, in the distance, a shape lingered, a dark sedan parked beneath the lamplight. Caleb saw it, but this time he didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging an old ghost that had lost its power. The bell tower struck 6. People began to sing softly an old gospel tune Benjamin loved. "This little light of mine." Mara slipped her hand into his. "You okay?" Caleb nodded, voice thick. "I think I finally am." Above them, the oak swayed, and the wind carried laughter into the night, weaving it through the city like a promise. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Lanterns glowed under the oak branches, casting circles of warm light over the crowd. The old fountain sparkled with pennies tossed by children making wishes. The Porter family stayed until the last guest left, helping volunteers stack chairs and gather leftovers for the shelters. Caleb wiped his hands on a towel. "You know," he said, glancing around, "I don't think I've ever seen this place so alive." Evelyn smiled. "You just reminded people what it means to believe again." Nearby, Eli and 2 other kids sorted donations into boxes. His laughter rang like wind chimes in the cool air. "Dad, look!" He held up a note someone had dropped into the donation jar. Caleb took it, reading aloud. "For the ones who never stopped giving, even when no one was watching." And he folded the note carefully, tucking it into his coat pocket. "That's going in the office wall." Later, as the last car pulled away, Caleb walked alone toward the riverfront. The city lights reflected off the water, soft and amber. He could almost hear his father's voice in the ripple of the current. "Light doesn't vanish, son. It moves." He sat on a bench, feeling the hum of the night settle around him. Footsteps approached Evelyn again, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "You think they'll come back?" He shook his head. "Not tonight. They saw what this place became. They know the truth doesn't hide anymore." Evelyn looked out at the skyline. Benjamin would be proud. Caleb smiled faintly. He always said pride was just love with its sleeves rolled up. They sat in silence for a while, watching the lights ripple. Back at the youth center, Mara and Eli finished locking up. The boy paused by the mural one last time, tracing the letters with his fingertip. "Mom," he said softly, "I think Grandpa's light got bigger." Mara bent down, brushing his hair back. "That's what happens when people share it." They stepped outside just as Caleb returned. He wrapped an arm around them both. For the first time in a long time, his shoulders no longer carried the weight of regret, only gratitude. As they walked home through the quiet streets, the black sedan appeared one last time at the corner. But instead of stopping, It rolled slowly past, the driver tipping his hat through the rain-streaked window. Caleb nodded back, not in fear, but in forgiveness. When they reached home, Eli ran to the porch, turning to face the night sky. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered. Inside, 3 candles waited on the table: hope, family, and tomorrow. Eli lit each one carefully. Mara dimmed the lights. "Say it, sweetheart." "For Grandpa," Eli whispered. "And for everyone who still believes in light." Oh, the candles flickered, their glow catching on the window glass, on Caleb's quiet smile, on the silver frame of Benjamin's photo. Evelyn's words returned to him then. "You reminded people what it means to believe again." He looked at his family, at the house that no longer felt haunted but blessed, and murmured, "We didn't just reopen a foundation, Dad. We reopened our hearts." Outside, the river flowed, steady and bright beneath the moonlight, and somewhere deep within its current, the echo of Benjamin Porter's laughter seemed to rise again, soft, content, eternal. Winter settled softly over Savannah. The oaks stood tall above the river, their last golden leaves clinging stubbornly to the branches as if refusing to let go. In the heart of the city, the old building that once bore dust and silence now carried new life. The Porter Youth Foundation was open its halls, filled with laughter, paintbrushes, and the warm echo of community. Caleb Porter walked through the front doors, breathing in the scent of fresh wood and coffee. On the wall near the entrance gleamed a new bronze plaque, "The Benjamin Porter Youth Foundation. For every child who believes kindness is power." He paused for a long moment. Every letter, every curve of Benjamin's name seemed to pulse with life. Mara appeared beside him, holding a clipboard of volunteer names. "It's really happening," she said softly. He nodded. "And for once, I don't feel like I'm chasing the past." Eli ran ahead, waving to a group of children painting a mural on the far wall. The mural showed a sunrise spilling gold over the Savannah River, with one phrase written in broad, bright letters: "Keep the light burning." Evelyn Graves entered through the back door, her gray coat glistening from the drizzle outside. She carried a sealed envelope. "It came from the safety deposit box," she said, handing it to Caleb. The handwriting was unmistakable Benjamin's. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short note, yellowed with time. "Son, when fear returns, meet it with purpose. When doubt whispers, answer with light. The foundation is not my gift to you. It's my apology. Make it right." Caleb read the words twice before speaking. "He didn't owe me an apology." Evelyn smiled gently. "He knew you'd say that. That's why he wrote it." So. The 3 stood silently for a moment as voices echoed through the building, children laughing, volunteers unpacking food, the faint sound of a piano from one of the rooms. It was as if Benjamin's spirit had seeped into the walls, alive in every sound. That afternoon, the community gathered under the oaks. Folding tables overflowed with pies and homemade casseroles. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain. Caleb stepped up to the small wooden stage built from old foundation boards. "Years ago," he began, "this place stood for something my father believed in, that every child deserves a light to follow. When that light dimmed, we lost more than a building. We lost hope. Today, thanks to all of you, it burns again." Applause rippled through the park. Mara wiped her eyes. Eli grinned from the front row, holding a lantern made of paper and string. As the sun dipped behind the city, lanterns began to glow, floating softly under the branches. For the first time in years, Caleb felt peace settle inside him, not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. That night, the Porter family walked home beneath the glowing streetlights. Savannah felt different, gentler, lighter. The black sedan that had once haunted their nights was gone, replaced by the quiet hum of crickets and wine through the trees. At home, the fire crackled in the hearth. On the mantel rested Benjamin's pocket watch, polished and ticking steadily. Its engraving read simply, "Keep the light burning." Eli traced the words with his fingertip. "It still works, Dad." Caleb smiled. Maybe it never stopped. Mara lit 3 candles. Hope, family, and tomorrow. Their soft glow painted the room gold. Eli whispered, "For Grandpa, and for everyone who still believes in kindness." Outside, the wind rustled through the oaks, carrying the sound of church bells faintly across the river. Caleb stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold, but gentle. He looked toward the horizon where the city lights shimmered like reflections of old prayers. He whispered, "We made it, Dad." And in that still moment, he almost heard a voice carried through the wind, calm, amused, familiar. "You already had everything you needed, son. You just had to open your heart." Caleb closed his eyes. When he went back inside, Mara was tucking Eli into the couch. The boy's sketchbook lay open beside him, showing a drawing of the foundation under the oak trees. Sunlight spilling through the branches. Caleb kissed his son's forehead, then turned off the last lamp. The watch kept ticking. The candles flickered low, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt whole again. As the night deepened, the river whispered softly against the shore. The oak branches swayed, scattering their last golden leaves like blessings across the city. Under that quiet savanna sky, the story of the Porters found its rest not in money, not in history, but in the simple, unending act of keeping the light alive. There's a quiet kind of magic that lingers in Savannah when the evening settles in the rustle of the oak trees, the faint sound of a church bell across the river, the glow of porch lights flickering like old memories that refuse to fade. Under those same oaks, Caleb Porter stood with his family, the people he'd once lost and now finally found again. 10 years of guilt, distance, and silence had melted into the simple sound of laughter, and the truth his father tried to teach him long ago finally made sense. Redemption doesn't live in the past. It's born in every choice we make to love again, to forgive again, and to stay. The Porters didn't rebuild a dynasty, they rebuilt a home. They didn't inherit money, they inherited a legacy of compassion. And maybe that's what this story has been trying to whisper to all of us, that unconditional kindness can change a destiny, that everyone deserves love and a second chance, and that happiness begins when we live for someone else besides ourselves. Caleb's journey wasn't about coming back to a house. It was about coming back to his son, to his faith, to the man he wanted to be. Think about your own porch light, the one you leave on for someone who's still finding their way. Maybe it's a grown child who hasn't called in months, or an old friend you haven't forgiven. Life has a way of dimming the light if we don't protect it. But even a single act of kindness, a letter written, a hand extended, a meal shared can brighten a whole horizon. Like that little lamp flickering in a kitchen window. One simple gesture can lead us back through the darkest roads toward the people and the peace we've been missing. So tonight, before you switch off the lamp beside your favorite chair, take a breath and remember, you're never too old to begin again. The past can't be undone, but love can still be chosen. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is forgive ourselves first. If this story touched your heart, type 1-inch the comments. If you'd like to share a memory or a thought of your own, type 0, because every story, just like every soul, still has room to grow. And remember this, even the smallest light, kept burning through the night, can guide someone home.